wondered how you'd build a society from the ground up where worship wasn't just a weekend thing, but was woven into every single day? Well, today, we're diving into the book of Numbers to see exactly how ancient Israel did it. They had this incredible system of offerings, feasts, and vows that was truly the very heartbeat of their relationship with God. So here's how we're going to break it all down. We'll start with the daily rhythms of their worship, then look at their huge annual festivals. After that, we'll get personal and talk about the power of vows, and finally, we'll see how this all connects to the teachings of Jesus. Let's jump in. All right, first up, let's talk about the absolute bedrock of Israelite worship. This wasn't just about showing up for the big holidays. No, this was a constant, ongoing conversation with God, and it happened through offerings. And when I say constant, I mean it. Just look at this rhythm. Worship was literally woven into the fabric of time for them. Every morning and every evening, a lamb was offered. On the Sabbath, that number doubled. And at the start of every single month, boom, an even bigger offering. It was this relentless, beautiful rhythm of devotion. But, and this is so important, this wasn't just about going through the motions. See, the monthly offerings also included a sin offering. And that tapped into this really deep, really human desire, right? The desire to be forgiven, to get a fresh start with a renewed heart. It was all about hitting the reset button. Okay, so let's zoom out from that daily grind of worship to the big annual blockbusters. 3 times a year, the whole nation was called to come together. These were massive celebrations marking key moments in their history and, just as importantly, the harvest cycles that they literally depended on for survival. This timeline gives us a great bird's eye view. You can see the year kicks off with Passover. Then comes the Feast of Weeks. But man, look at that 7th month. That is where all the action is. It is absolutely packed with 3 huge observances, making it the most sacred time of the entire year. What's so cool about these first 2 feasts is that they were doing 2 things at once. Passover was all about looking back, remembering their incredible escape from slavery in Egypt. But the Feast of Weeks was all about looking forward, celebrating the harvest and the food that would sustain them. Of course, this feast would later get a new name, Pentecost, and a whole new meaning in the New Testament. So now we're diving into that super-packed 7th month. It kicks off with the sound of trumpets and leads into what was, without a doubt, the most profound and solemn day on their entire calendar. We're talking about the Day of Atonement. This was a day for the whole nation to just stop, to fast, to repent, and something happened on this day that happened on no other. The high priest, and only the high priest, would walk into the most sacred space on earth, the most holy place, to make things right for the sins of the people for the whole year. And then, talk about a mood swing. After that incredibly solemn day, the whole vibe just flips to pure celebration with the Feast of Tabernacles. For 7 straight days, people would live in these little temporary shelters, almost like camping, to remember how God protected them in the wilderness. It was just a massive, week-long thank you party. And when I say it was a massive party, the scale of this gratitude was, well, it was staggering. To give you an idea, just look at this number for a second. 215. 215. What? What in the world could that possibly represent? Get this. That's the number of animals required for the offerings during this one festival alone. 215. It's just a stunning number that shows you this was a massive, all-in, communal investment in saying thank you. But worship wasn't just about these huge national events. It could also get incredibly personal, and that's where vows come in. Beyond all the required stuff, an individual could make their own sacred promise to God. Now, you gotta remember, in a world without written contracts, your spoken word was everything. It was your bond. So making a vow to God, whoa, that was the ultimate binding contract. It was the most powerful way you could express your personal commitment or give special thanks. And here's the key. Keeping that promise wasn't some private little thing. Nope. It was a public demonstration of your character, of your integrity. It showed both God and your entire community that you were a person of your word. Now, this is where things get a little more complex, because these very personal vows also had to work within the social structure of the ancient family. And this brings us right to a question you're probably asking right now. The text says a vow made by an unmarried daughter or a wife needed the approval of her father or husband. So what's that all about? The rules were actually pretty straightforward. If the father or husband heard the vow and he just stayed quiet, his silence was taken as approval. The vow was on. But if he spoke up right away and said no way, the vow was canceled. Poof, gone. She was totally released from it. And here's where the context is absolutely critical. The source material explains that this wasn't about a woman's spiritual standing or her capability. It was all about how responsibility was structured in that society. It really boiled down to economics. Since men were the ones with the economic authority in the household, and a vow could involve promising away family resources, livestock, money, things of value, the person responsible for those resources had to sign off. And what's really telling is that widows and divorced women were exempt from these rules. Why? Because they were economically independent. Their vows were their own business, period. Okay, so that brings us to our final stop on this journey. How did all these ancient practices, these offerings and these vows, get reframed and even transformed in the New Testament? You can see the shift pretty clearly here. In the Old Testament, making and keeping a vow was a huge sign of your faithfulness. But then Jesus comes along and gives some pretty strict warnings about making them at all. The whole focus moves away from these big formal promises to something much broader, living your entire life in a way that is itself an act of faithfulness. Which leaves us with a really good question to chew on. The core principles here, dedication, gratitude, making things right, those are timeless. So, if offerings and vows were the framework they used to show their faithfulness, what does that framework look like for us, in our lives today?